My adopted daughter handed me an envelope after the family dinner. Since you're too stupid to notice. After that, I I baked her favorite pie from scratch, but she walked in holding takeout and called me outdated. My hands still smelled of cinnamon when she slid that envelope across the counter and told me I was too blind to notice. I didn't argue. I just stood there, wondering when love had turned into a transaction. What was really inside that envelope, and how long had she planned to give it to me like that? I thought about saying something, about the hours I'd spent, the memories kneaded into that crust. But the words didn't come. Instead, I turned back to the kitchen and did the only thing I knew. I kept baking. I spent the whole morning baking her favorite pumpkin pie, only to see her walk in carrying food she ordered from some trendy restaurant. It was the kind of pie that needed time, not just in the oven, but in the rhythm of memory. I had mashed the pumpkin myself, real pumpkin, not canned. The spices came from that little shop downtown, the one that still packed cinnamon in brown paper bags. I even polished the old pie dish Marissa liked when she was little. She used to call it the sun plate because of the faded yellow rim. I don't cook like that often anymore. These days, I keep my meals simple. Toast, boiled eggs, maybe a tuna sandwich on Sundays. But holidays, Thanksgiving especially, were sacred. Not because I believed in turkey or its history. I believed in the act, laying the table, slicing the bread, warming the house with smells that meant home. Marissa was supposed to arrive at 3. She texted at 4:30. Running late, be there soon. When she did show up, half an hour after sunset, she was in heels too tall for the weather and carrying a silver bag with the name of some boutique restaurant I'd never heard of. Her smile was quick, almost rehearsed. Behind her trailed a man I didn't recognize. Tall, handsome, maybe 40. She never introduced him. I thought I'd save you some work, she said, brushing past me. You shouldn't be cooking at your age anyway. She didn't see the pie cooling on the counter. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. I said nothing, just took her coat, still warm from the car heater, and hung it by the door. Her companion gave me a nod, the kind men give to women they don't plan to remember. Dinner was quiet. The man, Connor, I think, talked mostly to Marissa, who scrolled her phone between bites of store-bought butternut squash ravioli. I served them wine in the good glasses, the ones I kept boxed all year. Marissa barely looked up when I asked how work was going. Busy. You know how it is, she said. She didn't ask me anything. I caught her glancing at her watch more than once. By the time I brought out the pie, still warm and fragrant, she shook her head. I'm stuffed, she said. And honestly, Mom, maybe don't make things so sweet next time. That much butter. It's just not healthy. Connor laughed, but it was polite and distracted. I wrapped the pie and placed it in the fridge. That fridge had stored 28 Thanksgivings worth of leftovers. This one wouldn't make the memory list. After dinner, while I was rinsing dishes, Marissa stepped into the kitchen. Her heels clicked softly on the tile. She leaned against the counter and slipped an envelope beside the sink. White. No markings. Thick. You can read it later, she said. Then she added, as if it were a joke, but not quite. Since you're too stupid to notice. She said it was like someone tossing a stone into a pond to test its depth. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, water running over my hands, the envelope slowly dampening at the edges. She went back to the living room as if nothing had happened. Connor was already by the door, helping himself to his coat. They had somewhere to be. Dessert at a friend's place, she said. Something trendy. Some rooftop thing in Burlington, probably. I nodded, said I understood, but I didn't. I stood at the window for a long time after they left, watching the tire tracks fade in fresh snow. The glass felt cold against my palm. I had always thought that family dinners, even when short, even when imperfect, left behind some trace of warmth. But the house felt emptier than it did before they arrived. I sat down and stared at the envelope again. It was slightly wet from the dishwater, the corners curling. I dried it gently with a dish towel, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I walked through the house and turned off all the lights. One by one. Living room, hallway, kitchen. I left the one by the window for last. The same lamp that had stayed on every time I waited for Marissa to come home late from college. Every time she called saying she missed the last bus. Every time she cried about her first breakup. When she was little, she'd curl up on the couch and rest her head in my lap while I read aloud. She'd ask me why she didn't look like me. I'd say, "Because you're more beautiful." She'd smile and fall asleep holding my thumb. People always praised me for taking in a child that wasn't mine. Said it was selfless, brave. But I never thought of it that way. I wasn't rescuing anyone. I just wanted to give someone the kind of love I'd always wanted to receive. Over the years, that love became quieter, less visible. Maybe I stopped reminding her it existed. Maybe I assumed she'd remember on her own. I sat down at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. I turned it over. No name, no return address, just sealed. For a moment, I wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe it was just an early birthday card. Maybe she'd written something sincere, and I was letting the tone of one thoughtless comment ruin it. But deep down, I knew better. The way she'd said it, flat, dismissive, a little too comfortable with cruelty. I made myself a cup of tea, the same blend I always drank when I needed to think. Chamomile and honey. Steam curled above the mug like a question I couldn't yet answer. I didn't open the envelope that night. I placed it in the drawer next to the oven mitts and went upstairs to bed. The house creaked in the wind. The snow tapped gently at the window. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence she left behind. Dinner wasn't even over, and yet I felt colder than the world outside. That night, I found myself folding napkins back into the drawer, even though I knew no one would be here for a long time. It's funny what the hands do when the heart doesn't know where to put itself. The table still smelled of the rosemary I'd sprinkled on the rolls. I had made those from scratch too, half whole wheat, just like she used to like. Back when she still noticed the difference. I checked the dishwasher twice, even though I knew it was empty. I guess I wanted to hear something mechanical working the way it should. I stood there, the door open, staring at the racks. Then I shut it quietly, like closing a chapter. I glanced at my phone on the counter. No missed calls, no thank you text. I told myself not to expect one, but the telling didn't make the waiting any easier. Upstairs, I turned on the radio. A jazz station from Montpellier played something slow, something full of empty spaces. The kind of music that doesn't fill a room but asks questions of it. I sat in the rocker by the window and looked out over the field. Snow dusted the tops of the fence posts. There was a time. She used to run across that field in galoshes 2 sizes too big, laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. She'd bring me dandelions like they were roses. And now she brings ravioli in a foil tray and an envelope without a return address. Sometimes I wonder if all mothers go through this. A slow, invisible migration from safe place to afterthought. I'm not angry, not yet. That part of me is still quiet. But there is a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. I remembered something odd from earlier, just as I was brushing my teeth. When she first stepped through the door, she didn't even glance at the bookshelf. That shelf has held her pictures since high school. The graduation frame, The one with the blue robe and crooked cap used to make her laugh. Tonight, she walked right past it like it was wallpaper. People think distance is made of miles, but it's not. It's made of eyes that don't linger, of words that arrive late or not at all. I pulled the chain on the lamp and let the room go dark. In the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself. Same sweater I'd worn last Thanksgiving, same hair, just a little thinner. But something in my face was different. There's a look women get when they've been trying too hard for too long. I turned away from it. There was no letter inside, just a copy of a legal document. My signature at the bottom, but I don't remember ever signing it. I sat on the edge of my bed, envelope open, paper unfolded. It didn't crinkle like a personal letter would. It lay flat, thick, and legal. A form labeled Durable Power of Attorney, neatly typed, with my full name at the top, and at the bottom, my signature, except I didn't remember writing it. The ink looked familiar. The signature even mimicked the slight upward tail I always did on the K. But it felt wrong, like looking at your own reflection and not recognizing the eyes. I held the paper to the light. My hands didn't shake, not yet. But the cold had crept up through the floorboards, and now it wrapped around my knees like doubt. There was no cover letter, no note explaining why it was sent or what it meant. Just the form. 2 pages, clipped together, as if all it needed was the weight of ink to shift everything I'd spent a life building. The last time I went to the bank with Marissa was sometime in August. She had called the night before, saying something about new statewide estate laws and how we should get ahead of it. I agreed without asking too much. I trusted her. At the bank, she spoke for most of the appointment. I remember the man behind the desk smiling too much, handing me papers, flipping pages. I didn't have my glasses. She told me where to start. I didn't ask questions. Back then, I still thought asking meant you didn't believe the person sitting next to you. I thought love meant full trust. I placed the paper flat on the comforter and stood up, walking slowly to the closet. I pulled down an old metal file box labeled Important Documents. The label had faded, just like the memories tucked inside. I brought it to the bed and sat cross-legged, knees aching under my nightgown. Inside, tax returns, insurance policies, the warranty for a refrigerator I no longer owned, and near the back, copies of my signature, from the deed to this house, the will I'd made after my husband passed, the agreement I'd once signed with the nursing union, all in my hand, all still mine. But this one felt different, just close enough to pass, just wrong enough to sting. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the panes. The old farmhouse made its usual groans, but I heard them differently now. I reached for the phone. Arthur answered after 2 rings. His voice was always steady, like a man used to disappointing weather and slow change. "Hope I didn't wake you," I said. "You didn't. I was reading. I got something strange today. Thought maybe you'd know more about it than I do." "I can take a look," he said. "Bring it over tomorrow? Could you come here instead?" A pause. "Sure." I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. Arthur had known me long enough to hear what wasn't spoken. After we hung up, I stayed sitting there for a while, paper in my lap, radio off. No noise, no music, just the sound of air moving, as if the house was bracing itself. Morning came slowly. Gray light seeped in under the blinds, soft but indifferent. I didn't sleep much, and when I did, it was the kind of sleep that doesn't rest you. Just a long blink into more questions. Arthur showed up around 9, wearing the same wool coat he always did when snow threatened. He held a thermos in one hand and a small flashlight in the other. "Bad eyes," he said, holding it up. Prints too fine these days. I laid the document on the table, the same table where Marissa had drawn stick figures in crayon 25 years ago. Now it held fine print and legal phrases I didn't fully understand. He read in silence. Occasionally he hummed, the kind of low noise that doesn't mean agreement or disagreement, just thought. When he reached the end, he didn't look at me right away. "She has full access," he said finally, "to your accounts, your property, everything really." I thought it was just for emergencies. Arthur nodded slowly. "That's how it starts. Mine did too." He took a sip from his thermos. The coffee smelled strong, bitter, grounding. "My son said it would help in case something happened to me," he added. "Said it'd make things easier. I didn't read it all, just trusted him." He paused. 6 months later, the house was in his name. Then it was on the market. I said nothing. My hands stayed flat on the table. I looked at them, how still they were. Stillness can look like calm, but I knew better. It was the kind of stillness right before something breaks. Arthur didn't offer advice. He just folded the paper neatly and pushed it back toward me. "I'm not saying she'll do the same," he said. "But this gives her the power to." He stood, nodded once, and let himself out. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears weren't ready. What came instead was a slow, heavy ache in my ribs, like my body had just started to realize something inside it had shifted. I walked upstairs again. The cold in the hallway met me like an old friend. I turned on the lamp in my bedroom and stood there, staring at the document. That's when I noticed the envelope it had come in. I hadn't paid it much mind before, but now I saw it had no return address, not even a stamp, which meant she didn't mail it. She left it here, on purpose, in my kitchen, next to the sink, after dinner, so I'd find it when the house was empty, when the dishes were done, when there was nothing left to distract me. I reached into my dresser drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, old family photos. Marissa in her first Halloween costume, a bumblebee. Marissa in kindergarten, missing her front teeth. Marissa holding a ribbon from a spelling bee she nearly fainted before finishing. I ran my finger over the edges of each picture. Memory is cruel. It makes you remember things exactly when you wish you could forget them. I thought about the double shifts I'd worked to keep her in private school, about the time I gave up the down payment on a new roof so she could take an unpaid internship in Boston, about the years I let go of my own plans quietly so hers could grow louder. I stood by the fireplace, paper still in hand. The photos spread across the mantel like ghosts. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself say something out loud. No one else was in the room, just me. But the words came anyway, quiet and cold. "So, this is what she thinks of me." I didn't leave the house the rest of that day. Not because of the weather, it wasn't snowing yet, but because everything outside felt irrelevant. I made myself a sandwich around noon and forgot to eat it. It sat on the plate, bread curling at the edges, mayonnaise drying at the corners. I just watched the light move across the floorboards like time had given up on me too. There are betrayals that come like thunder, fast and loud. But this came quiet, like fog. It seeped into things, into chairs, into spoons, into the photo frame by the kitchen sink. Marissa had once told me I was too sentimental, that I held on to things long after they stopped being useful. I think she meant napkins, or old scarves, maybe even recipes. But now I wonder if she meant herself. In the hallway, I stared at the coat hooks. Hers still hung there. A long gray wool one on a cold October when she had just started her job downtown. She had forgotten it last winter and never asked for it back. I left it there anyway, Part of me thought maybe she'd need it again, or maybe she'd come back just to see it still waiting. I opened the closet and reached for the bottom shelf. Inside a shoebox were old letters, birthday cards, school notes, things she had written me back when she still signed off with "Love you always." I read one from when she was 12. It said, "You're the best mom even though I'm not really your daughter. I'll never forget what you did for me." That word, real, burned in a new way now. Back then, I thought it was a phase, that she'd outgrow the idea that biology made a family. Now I wasn't sure what she believed. Maybe she never outgrew it. Maybe she just buried it under success and strategy. I placed the note back in the box carefully, as if it were fragile. Some things are, not the paper, but the person holding it. Later, I sat by the window, not watching the road, just looking through it. A dog barked down the street. Somewhere, a snow shovel scraped concrete. The world continued, stubborn as ever, and me, I just sat there, still holding a truth I hadn't asked for. Maybe I didn't miss the signs. Maybe I just refused to believe my daughter could look me in the eye and lie. It's strange what the mind filters out when it wants to believe the best in someone. I thought Marissa's long silences were just exhaustion, that her clipped answers were stress, that the way she avoided eye contact was modern busyness, not deceit. But Arthur's warning had cracked something loose. And now her words kept playing in my head like a scratched record. "You don't need to worry about the details, Mom." That sentence was built for dismissal, polite, clean, designed to make me feel safe while removing me from the conversation altogether. I didn't say anything to her, not yet. Instead, I put on my coat, grabbed my notebook, and drove into town. The Maple Bridge Public Library hadn't changed in decades. Same smell of paper and mildew, same humming fluorescent lights that always flickered near the back stacks. I found the section marked Legal Self-Help and ran my finger along the spines. Most books were years out of date, but one had a chapter on power of attorney and elder rights in Vermont. I pulled it off the shelf, sat down at a table near the window, and started reading. The language was dense, designed for lawyers, not people like me. But I made notes anyway. Phrases that stood out. Revocation process. Formally notify involved institutions. Witness signature required. I wrote down everything, even what I didn't understand. I could look it up later. Outside, someone shoveled the walkway, the sound scraping against the stillness like a warning. I glanced up briefly, then went back to the book. A librarian passed by and smiled. I smiled back, closed the book, and tucked my notes into my purse. Next stop was the bank. It looked like it had been scrubbed clean of any personality. Sleek counters, pale walls, digital screens showing interest rates and winter promotions. A young woman greeted me with a scripted cheerfulness that felt like customer service training more than genuine warmth. "I'm here to request printed statements on my joint accounts," I said. She typed something, smiled, then hesitated. "I'll need to speak with a manager." I waited, hands folded in my lap. When the manager came, older, friendlier, but still cautious, he handed me a stack of papers and said, "Some of these changes were recent. Do you want a copy of the updated ownership structure as well?" I nodded. He didn't ask why. Back in my car, I read through the statements, transfers, new signatories, adjusted access dates, a few notations I didn't understand, but the trend was clear. Over the past year, Marissa had been making decisions that removed me from control, slowly, methodically, like a frog being boiled in water. I didn't cry, not this time. Instead, I drove to the Pine Cone Diner. Arthur was already there, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. The place smelled like maple syrup and scrambled eggs. I slid into the booth across from him, set the papers on the table, and looked him in the eye. "Tell me your story," I said. Arthur leaned back, both hands around his mug like he needed the warmth more than the caffeine. "My son took me to a notary on my birthday," he said. "Said it was for simplifying things, just in case anything happened. Sounded responsible, loving even." I nodded slowly, not interrupting. "He had me sign a few forms, called them estate planning documents, said it would help avoid probate." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Probate? That's a word you only hear when someone's planning around you, not with you." "What happened?" I asked it, even though I knew. 6 months later, I got a letter saying my house was no longer mine. He'd sold it, used the money to cover debts I didn't even know he had. By the time I figured it out, it was legal. I'd signed everything. I gave him the keys myself without knowing it. Then I looked down at my hands, suddenly cold. "Did he ever apologize?" "No," Arthur said quietly. "He just said he did what he had to do, that it was time for him to build something new." The waitress came by with a pot of coffee. I shook my head. Arthur refilled his. The smell of syrup and toast hung in the air, but I had no appetite. We sat there for a while, not talking. Sometimes silence is the only language two wounded people understand. When I got home, I laid out everything on the kitchen table. Legal books, bank statements, my notes. I didn't feel like a mother anymore. I felt like a case file. As I was clearing space for my laptop, I knocked my phone off the counter. It clattered to the floor, and when I picked it up, the screen had opened to the voice memo app. Something blinked at me. A recording from August. I didn't remember saving anything then, but I pressed play. The sound quality was faint, like it had been recorded by accident. Then I heard her voice, "Marissa." "No, she won't push back. She never has. Mom's too soft. If I don't do this, someone else will." My fingers tightened around the phone. I replayed it, again and again. Same words, same tone. Cool, efficient, not cruel, just indifferent. Like I was an equation she'd solved. I sat down at the kitchen table. The ticking of the wall clock was the only sound. Maybe I had missed the signs, or maybe I'd seen them but dressed them up in prettier clothes, called them fatigue, ambition, modern life. But that recording didn't leave room for illusions. She had planned this, not just the documents, but the reasoning, the justification. I opened my laptop. It creaked from disuse, dust along the corners, a piece of masking tape still on the edge, labeled Marissa's College Fund 2011. I typed slowly, each word sharp. How to revoke a power of attorney in Vermont. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed with the lights off, watching shadows stretch across the ceiling like long, accusing fingers. The house made noises it hadn't made before. Or maybe they were always there, and I was just finally quiet enough to hear them. The wind tapping on the back window, the old radiator clanking like it was clearing its throat, pipes groaning somewhere deep in the walls. Around 3 a.m, I sat at the edge of my bed and pulled on my slippers. The kind with fleece lining. Marissa had given them to me 3 Christmases ago. I still remembered how she'd laughed, saying they were for cozy old lady nights. Back then, I had smiled. Now, I wasn't sure if that moment had been real or part of some long rehearsal for this betrayal. I walked down the hallway and opened the linen closet. There, at the very top, was a box I hadn't touched in years. It held receipts, birthday cards, a tiny knit hat from when Marissa first came to live with me. She had been 6, scared of the dark, but not of me. I unfolded one of her old school drawings. A picture of us holding hands, stick figures with exaggerated smiles. My name was spelled wrong, Bernadine, but she had drawn a heart above it anyway. I put it back in the box carefully, then sat in the living room as the sky began to lighten. Outside, the snow had finally started. Soft, steady, the kind that erased edges. At 7 a.m., the garbage truck rumbled down the street, its brakes screeching in protest. Somewhere, a radio played faint Christmas music, tinny and cheerful. The world was turning, ordinary and unapologetic, while mine felt paused. I poured myself a cup of coffee. No sugar, no cream, just black and bitter like the morning. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I lit the fireplace, not because it was cold, but because I needed something warm to look at, something alive. The flames caught slowly, then opened up in the hearth like they'd been waiting for me. I watched them and thought, this isn't over. This can't be where it ends. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice, those 6 words echoing in my head. By morning, I wasn't broken anymore. I was planning. I wasn't afraid of being tricked again. What scared me was pretending I didn't know anymore. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after the storm. Not relief. No, nothing that soft. More like stillness. The kind that lets you hear your own breath again. That was how I felt the next morning. I got dressed slowly, layering up against the frost that painted the windows in silver patterns. My boots squeaked on the wooden floor as I made my way to the kitchen. I poured myself a mug of coffee, steaming hot. No cream. The same bitterness I'd come to appreciate. Then I picked up the envelope I had prepared the night before. It was addressed to a name I hadn't thought of in years. Ms. Judith Cohen. She had helped a neighbor write a will back in 2017, and I'd remembered her kindness, the way she explained every line like she was teaching instead of just billing by the hour. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted precision. And for that, I needed someone who knew the rules better than I did. The sun had barely crested the hills when I stepped outside. Maple Bridge was quiet. No kids on bikes. No dogs barking yet. Just that brittle cold that makes everything seem breakable. Miss Cohen's office was behind the post office, tucked between a secondhand bookstore and a closed-down barbershop. A brass plaque read, Cohen and Myers, LLP, though I knew from the neighbor that Myers had passed away 5 years ago. Inside, the warmth hit me like a sigh. Wooden walls, a ticking clock, the faint smell of old paper and lemon polish. Miss Cohen greeted me with a look that said she didn't remember me, but was willing to pretend she did. I'd like to update my will, I said, folding my gloves in my lap. And, while we're at it, there are some other documents I'd like to change. Her eyes sharpened, but she nodded. Of course, Bernadine. Let's take it one step at a time. We talked for over an hour. She walked me through the revocation process, making sure I understood every form. I signed the papers slowly, carefully, like each letter of my name was reclaiming something I'd given away without knowing it. I'd also like to designate a new beneficiary, I said. Everything, the house, the accounts, whatever's left. I want it to go to the Maple Bridge Children's Fund. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. When we finished, she asked, Do you want me to file a report? I looked down at my hands, nodded in my lap. No, I said. I just want her to know. I'm not stupid. And I'm still here. Ms. Cohen didn't smile, but there was something close in her eyes. Maybe respect. Maybe relieved that I wasn't like the others who came in screaming and broken. I stepped back into the cold with my coat buttoned high and my chin tucked down. Snow had started to fall, soft, slow, deliberate, like the world was taking a breath with me. I walked 3 blocks to the diner, Same one Arthur and I had met at, but this time I sat alone. A different booth, notebook in front of me, pen in hand, black coffee steaming. I started writing, not a letter, not a journal, just facts, dates, names, transfers, passwords I had changed, accounts I had rerouted. I made a trail that only I could follow, and I kept it neat. Halfway through my second cup, I glanced out the window and saw a boy walking a golden retriever, both of them slipping a little on the icy sidewalk. Life, still going on. Unaware of the quiet war inside me. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was clarity. The waitress came by and topped off my coffee without asking. I nodded in thanks, then glanced at the time. Just past noon. I had told no one where I was going, not even Arthur. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I needed to know I could still move in this world without asking permission. A strange kind of muscle was waking up inside me. Not anger, not pride, just steadiness. I took out the list I had started last night and added a new line. Change security questions. Then another. Remove joint access to the safety deposit box. I didn't even remember agreeing to a joint box. Maybe I had. Maybe I'd been too tired or too trusting. Or maybe I just believed that saying yes was what love looked like at my age. I flipped the page and began writing something else. Not a list this time, just a sentence that had been circling in my head since I'd walked out of Miss Cohen's office. I once gave everything to raise a child. Now, I'm saving what little I have left from her. It felt strange to see it written down, like putting my own breath on paper. But it was true, and if I didn't write it, I might forget how clear it had become. The bell above the diner door jingled. For a moment, I tensed, half expecting to see Marissa's tall silhouette or that coat she loved with the gold buttons. But it was just a man in overalls and a young girl in snow boots. I looked back at my notebook. Focus. In the last hour, I had revoked power of attorney, redirected all mail to a new P.O. box, and began preparing a separate checking account under only my name. Ms. Cohen had given me a referral to a CPA in the next town over. Someone discreet, who didn't gossip, she'd said with a half smile. This wasn't about hiding. This was about reclaiming. As I gathered my things, Arthur's name popped up on my phone. I hesitated for just a second, then answered. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I'm at the diner," I said. "Had some errands." There was a pause, then his voice lowered. "You did it, didn't you?" I didn't need to explain what he meant. "Yes." Another pause, then, "I'm proud of you, Bernie." I didn't reply right away. My throat felt full. Instead, I said, "Snow's getting heavier. Want some company?" "Not today. I think I need the quiet." He didn't argue, just said, "You know where to find me." I slipped my phone into my coat pocket and stood slowly. The notebook went into my handbag, zipped shut. I left cash on the table. Too much, but the waitress smiled as she picked it up. Outside, the snow had begun to layer over everything. My footprints from earlier were already fading. At home, I lit the fire again. Then I checked every lock on every window. Not out of fear, out of habit, out of respect for myself. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one with the frayed armrest, and opened my laptop. I didn't browse. I didn't check my email. I opened a new document and typed a single sentence. The moment you stop pretending not to know is the moment you begin to remember who you are. I saved it without a title. Just as I was about to close the screen, my phone buzzed again. A text from Marissa. "Coming by tomorrow. We need to talk." I stared at it for a long moment before replying. Good. So do I. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet labor. I washed dishes that didn't need washing, sorted drawers I hadn't opened in years. Somewhere between the old batteries and the forgotten takeout menus, I found a ring box. Inside was a pin, a little silver hummingbird with one wing slightly bent. Marissa had given it to me when she was 9. I remembered the way she'd whispered, "So you don't forget you can fly." I closed the box gently and put it in my pocket. Not because I forgave her, but because not every memory needed to be exiled. Some could stay, quietly, without permission to rule over me. By late afternoon, the sky had turned to that strange, bruised blue it always wore before a storm. I made a pot of chicken soup, not because I was hungry, but because the smell of it made the house feel less hollow. I took out my address book, the old leather one with torn pages and names I hadn't called in decades. I flipped through it slowly. Most of the people were gone, or too far away to reach. But one name stood out: Lorraine. She had once been a colleague, the kind who always smelled like cinnamon and had stories about every person in town. She had moved to a senior complex in Burlington years ago. I dialed the number on a whim. She answered on the third ring. "This is Lorraine." "Lorraine, it's Bernie Whitaker." A pause, then a gasp. "Bernie? Lord, I thought you'd moved to Florida and found yourself a man." I laughed. Neither happened. We talked for 20 minutes. Nothing deep, mostly small-town gossip and updates on mutual friends, who had hip replacements, who had grandkids on the honor roll. But at the end, I said, "Lorraine, if I needed a witness for a document, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions, would you still be that person?" There was no hesitation. "Give me the time and the address, sugar. I'll bring my best pen." After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't in weeks, tethered, not to a person, to a choice, to the idea that I could build my own scaffolding again. Later that night, I went into the garage. It was freezing, the kind of cold that bites through layers. I pulled down an old suitcase, dust coating the leather like ash. Inside were letters, some from Marissa, most from Robert, her adoptive father, written back when he still remembered birthdays and holidays. I didn't read them. I just stared at the weight of them, the life they once held, now reduced to ink and assumptions. I zipped the suitcase back up and slid it behind the lawn chairs. Not today. Not anymore. The last thing I did before bed was change the locks. Not because I thought she'd come uninvited, but because I needed to know that every key still in circulation was one I'd chosen to give. As I climbed into bed, the wind picked up outside. It scraped the windows like fingernails. I turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle around me. This time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. I set out 2 wine glasses, as if it were just a warm mother-daughter chat. But really, I was testing how well I could play innocent. The room looked soft in the evening light. The fireplace murmured quietly, flames licking behind the grate like they had their own secrets. I adjusted the lamp by the buffet table, not too bright. The snow had started falling again, gently this time. I lit one of the cinnamon candles she'd given me last Christmas, a scent I never liked, but she insisted I would eventually grow into. On the table sat a dish of mixed nuts, a folded napkin at each place setting, and a bottle of Merlot breathing in the center. Everything is calm, even inviting, but inside I was humming with alertness. This wasn't dinner. This was a theater. Marissa arrived right on time. She always was punctual when she wanted something. Her coat was sleek, black wool with a cinched waist. She kissed my cheek with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and handed me a bag of herbal tea for your joints. she said, and I thanked her politely, as if that didn't sound like a line from a pamphlet at the senior clinic. We sat. She didn't comment on the wine but accepted the glass. I poured for her, then filled mine. Not too much, just enough to make her think I was comfortable. I didn't drink. I watched. "It's so cozy in here," she said, looking around, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Snow helps," I replied, keeping my tone light. We clinked glasses, hers with a little too much enthusiasm. "I've missed this," she said. I tilted my head. "Missed what?" She hesitated for a moment. "Just catching up. Talking without all the busyness." I smiled. "Of course." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "Actually," she said, "I brought a few things. Just housekeeping stuff. Nothing urgent, but I figured we might as well go over them while we're relaxed." "Sure," I said, sipping the wine I had no intention of swallowing. She opened the folder and laid the papers between us. Legal looking, clean font, stapled neatly. "It's just a small update to the power of attorney forms," she said casually. "Simplifying a few things. You remember we talked about this back in October, right?" I nodded slowly. "You said it was for emergencies." "Exactly. And I've been thinking, it's probably smart to get ahead of things, just in case. You never know what could happen." I ran a fingertip along the edge of the papers. "No, I suppose you don't." Her eyes searched my face. She was trying to gauge how much I knew. I gave her nothing. "You don't have to sign right now," she said quickly. "I mean, no pressure. Just take a look. Think about it." "I will," I said. She launched into a speech about financial stability, estate taxes, how families who plan ahead avoid stress down the road. She used phrases like streamlining responsibilities and burden reduction. I nodded along, asked a few soft questions, nothing too pointed. "So this would make things easier for you?" I asked at one point. "For both of us," she answered. "But especially you." I refilled her wine glass. She didn't notice that mine remained almost untouched. The clock in the hallway ticked, each second its own quiet judge. I let her speak. That had been the advice. Let her talk first. Let her reveal herself. And she did. As the second glass of wine loosened her tongue, her voice took on that lilt I remembered from her teenage years. The one she used when trying to convince me she wasn't lying. She leaned in closer. "Honestly, Mom, I've already done so much of the legwork. The bank stuff, the insurance calls, all of it. I've been managing this whole ship for a while now. And I don't mind, really, but it's easier if we're aligned." "Aligned," I repeated, like it was a new word I needed to learn. She smiled. "You've always been so trusting. I love that about you." It wasn't a compliment. Not anymore. I folded the edge of the napkin between my fingers, listening to her circle the same phrases like she was rehearsing a pitch. It didn't bother me, not in the way it once might have. I was watching her now, not as a mother desperate to be loved, but as a woman testing the limits of another's truth. She handed me a pen, silver, sleek. I took it, turned it in my hand. "There's no rush," she repeated. "It's just easier if we wrap this up soon. Banks get fussy at the end of the fiscal year." Her voice was too smooth, polite. But something in her tone betrayed her. I recognized it. Not fear exactly, but pressure. Pressure from some unseen clock she thought I couldn't hear. I tapped the pen once on the table, then set it down deliberately beside my wine glass. "So," I said, "you've already started updating things? Even before I signed?" She blinked. "Only the basics. Nothing final, of course." "And the accounts? The ones with both our names now. Did you switch those too?" There was a pause. Her mouth opened just slightly, as if searching for the right expression. But she recovered fast. It's just easier to access. In case of emergency. You know that. Emergencies, I echoed, then smiled faintly. Funny how often those seem to come up lately. She tilted her head. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged. Nothing really. Just a thought. Her eyes narrowed for half a second. The smile didn't disappear, but it frayed at the edges. You've always hated dealing with this stuff, she said. You used to say paperwork made your head spin. Still does, I said. I reached forward slowly and placed my hand over the stack of unsigned documents. But I changed my bank accounts last week, I said calmly. You didn't notice? The silence that followed was sharp. She stared at me, expression locked between confusion and disbelief, like the floor had tilted slightly and she was trying not to lose her footing. What? I kept my gaze steady. Passwords changed. Beneficiaries updated. The lawyer said it's all finalized. Why would you? She faltered, then gave a short, incredulous laugh. You talked to a lawyer? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She stared at me. I could see her trying to assess the damage, measuring the angles of a plan that was suddenly no longer hers. You didn't say anything, she murmured. You acted like everything was fine. I refilled her glass again. The bottle was nearly empty now. I just wanted to see what you'd say, I said, voice soft. Now I know. Marissa didn't reach for the wine. Her shoulders were stiff, mouth a tight line. Was this some kind of test? She asked it, low and sharp. No, I replied. It was a conversation, or at least, it started as one. She stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I didn't move. You think I'm some kind of monster? No, I said, watching her. I think you're a person, and I finally stopped pretending not to see who you are. She walked to the window, arms folded. Snow clung to the panes, thickening now in the fading light. I did all of this for your sake, she said, back turned to me. I was trying to protect your future. My future? I smiled to myself. At 79, you don't get it, do you? She snapped, turning around. If I didn't step in, someone else would have. You're soft, Mom. You've always been. You let people walk all over you. I was trying to make sure you didn't get taken advantage of. I stood now, slowly. The fire cracked once behind me, loud in the silence. You weren't protecting me, I said. You were helping yourself. And I let you, for longer than I care to admit. But not anymore, she scoffed. You think you're in control now? I don't think, I said. I know. Her eyes scanned the room, as if looking for something familiar to grab hold of. But the house wasn't hers. It never was. I should go, she said stiffly. I didn't stop her. She gathered her folder, the untouched wine glass, and her coat. As she reached for the door, I added, I'll send you the contact information for Ms. Cohen, in case you have any questions. She paused, just long enough for me to notice. Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply walked over to the table, cleared the glasses, and rinsed them in the sink. The warmth of the water reminded me I was still here, still solid. Later that night, I sat in the living room, same fire burning low, and wrote 3 lines in a notebook I hadn't touched in years. At 1, trust is a slow thing. 2, love shouldn't feel like debt. Chapter 3, I am not stupid, and I am not gone. I sat at the kitchen table long after Marissa left, the smell of her perfume still lingering faintly in the air. It was strange, the way quiet settled after the confrontation, not like peace, but like dust finally floating down after the weight of a storm. I looked down at the documents she'd tried to hand me. Neat edges, precise fonts, language built to confuse. I didn't tear them. That would have felt too dramatic. Instead, I slid them into a drawer with an old manual can opener and expired coupons. Let them sit with other things no one cared to understand anymore. Outside, the snow thickened. It clung to the porch steps and darkened the edges of the window glass. I reached for a cardigan, one I hadn't worn in years, brown with frayed cuffs, and wrapped it around my shoulders. Not for warmth, really, for memory. In the quiet, I found myself walking down the hallway to the old linen closet. Behind stacks of folded towels was a small tin box, the kind people once used for recipes. I hadn't opened it in over a decade. Inside were index cards, some smudged, some yellowing, each written in my own hand. Recipes I'd copied from neighbors, friends, Marissa's third-grade teacher. I ran my fingers over the ink. Cherry cobbler, Sunday meatloaf, her favorite cinnamon French toast. I remembered how she used to climb onto the kitchen stool, still in her pajamas, watching me dip slices of bread into the egg mixture. "Make it extra cinnamony," she'd say, as if I'd never forgotten. I smiled at the memory, but it didn't soften anything. That's what no one ever tells you about betrayal. It doesn't erase the love. It just lets you finally see the boundary between the two. Back in the dining room, I lit a single candle. Not because I was expecting company, just because it felt like the kind of evening that deserved a small, steady flame. I took out the notepad again, the same one I'd scribbled on the night before. But instead of bullet points, I wrote something different this time. A letter. Not to Marissa, not to Arthur, just to myself. "Dear Bernadine," it began, "you gave, you endured, you bent without breaking, and now you rise, not in revenge, but in recognition." I paused, then underlined the word recognition. There was no need for more. The rest could wait. I folded the letter and slipped it under the candle holder. Tomorrow, I'd tuck it into a book, maybe leave it on the shelf next to the window where the light hit just right at noon. For now, I poured myself one last glass of water, turned off the kitchen light, and stood at the foot of the stairs. I didn't feel triumphant, just grounded. For the first time in a long time, I would sleep with the bedroom door unlocked. Not because I trusted the world again, but because I trusted myself to face it. I don't think I won. I just stopped losing. That morning, the world outside looked like it had been scrubbed clean in the night. Snow layered over everything, the porch railing, the bushes, the street signs half swallowed in drifts. The kind of snow that blanketed the noise, made the world hold its breath for a minute. I didn't rush to make coffee or check the clock. I sat in the old rocking chair by the front window, wrapped in the same cardigan from the night before. The same cardigan I wore back when Marissa first arrived in my life, barely 7 years old, with big eyes and hands that flinched every time someone spoke too loudly. I remembered how she'd hated winter, said it felt like the sky was pushing down on her. I used to tell her the snow wasn't heavy. It was just the world trying to quiet itself. Now, sitting with a lukewarm mug and sore knees, I finally understood what I'd meant. The fireplace still held the last of last night's heat, but the cold was always there. Not cruel, just persistent. But I had learned how to keep myself warm. Not with flames, not with people, with knowing, with finally seeing what was mine to carry and what I could put down. On the mantel, next to the ceramic angel I'd meant to pack away after Christmas, sat a sealed envelope. My name wasn't on it. Hers was. Marissa. The letter inside hadn't come easily. I rewrote it 3 times. The first version was bitter. The second was just noise. But the third, well, I didn't know if it was right. I only knew it was true. I didn't plan to send it. That wasn't the point. Some words are meant to be said just once, and sometimes only to yourself. I don't blame you, but I also don't belong to you. I am not yours to control. I paused as I read that last line again. There had been a time when I would have erased it, softened it, but now it felt necessary. The sound of tires on fresh snow pulled me out of my head. Arthur's old pickup rolled into the driveway, slow and steady like always. He didn't bother knocking anymore. Just opened the door, stomped his boots, and held up 2 paper cups of diner coffee. "I brought the strong stuff," he said, handing one to me. "Figured we might both need it." We sat in silence for a while, the way people do when they've run out of things to explain. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet. He looked at the mantel, then at me. "You gonna send that?" I shook my head. "No, I already said it. That's enough." He nodded, sipping his coffee. "You're different now." "Am I?" "Yeah, not harder. Just clearer." I didn't reply, but I let that word sit between us. Clear. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded pamphlet. Community garden sign up for spring. "I thought maybe you'd want to plant something next year," he said. "Tomatoes, beans, whatever." I smiled. I might still have it in me. The truth was, I hadn't touched a trowel in years. My knees wouldn't like it. My back would complain. But that wasn't really the point. It wasn't about tomatoes. Later that morning, I walked out to the mailbox, scarf wrapped twice, boots crunching on the icy steps. The air bit at my cheeks, but I didn't mind. It felt good to feel the cold and not flinch. Inside the box was a single envelope, cream-colored, handwritten. I thought maybe, for a second, it was from her. But the return address said Maplebridge Children's Shelter. I opened it right there, the wind tugging gently at the corners of the paper. "Dear Mrs. Whitaker, we are honored and humbled by your generous gift. The scholarship fund you've established in Marissa's name will help so many children find the futures they deserve. Thank you for believing in them." I stood still, the words washing over me like warm water in the snow. That shelter had been a cold place once. I remembered the smell of bleach, the way the radiators clicked at night, and the way Marissa's tiny fingers had held my sleeve like it was a lifeline. That was where we became a family. Or so I thought. It felt right to send something back there, not out of revenge, not out of spite, just to set something down, to return part of what had been taken, and make something new from it. Inside, I placed the thank you letter next to the one I'd written for Marissa. 2 envelopes, one that would never be opened by her, and one that had already found its way to the right hands. Arthur washed our mugs and left without saying much else. That was the thing about getting older. Sometimes you don't need full sentences. Sometimes it was enough to show up with coffee and a garden flyer. By noon, I sat alone again. The fire had burned low. The snow outside had started to melt just enough to drip from the eaves. Each drop landing on the porch steps felt like a quiet punctuation mark to something that had taken too long to say. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for her to call or show up. If she did, she'd find a woman who wasn't afraid of being misunderstood anymore. A woman who'd stopped explaining herself just to be heard. There's a kind of freedom in not needing to be right, in knowing your story, even if no one else reads it. I went back to the mantel and lit a small candle beside the angel figurine. Not for forgiveness, not for hope, just for peace. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting, not for approval, not for apologies, not for anything. I just sat there in the quiet, letting the flame dance against the glass, and thought about spring, about warm soil and red tomatoes, and a patch of earth I could call mine again. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I'd chosen to take it back. And that, I thought, was enough. After everything, I don't live in fear or guilt anymore. I begin each morning with a stronger cup of coffee, slower steps, and a much lighter heart. Not because everything has been fixed, but because I stopped clinging to things that no longer belong to me. Life after a fracture like that isn't some grand new beginning. It's more like learning to survive in the same house, with all its cracks and corners and memories you can't erase. But I no longer avoid them. I look them in the eye, breathe through them, and keep going. I started tending to a few small pots on the windowsill. Spring's still far off, but I want something worth waiting for. I say yes to Arthur's coffee invitations more often, not out of loneliness, but because I've learned how to accept kindness without feeling like I owe anyone anything. As for Marissa, I don't hope for some dramatic reconciliation, but I also don't carry bitterness. Forgiveness to me now isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about setting myself free from carrying it all alone. I used to believe being a mother meant giving everything, staying silent, sacrificing without question. But I've come to understand, love shouldn't mean surrendering your worth. When you stop valuing yourself, people eventually treat you like you have nothing left to offer. I didn't need a win. I just needed to stop losing pieces of myself trying to keep the peace. I went through a storm so quiet no one saw it. But I'm still here. I wake up each day, pour my own coffee, and choose how the rest of my story is written. And if you're reading this with a knot still tight in your chest, remember this: you don't need anyone's permission to reclaim your voice. Sometimes freedom begins the moment you decide to stop shrinking just to make others comfortable.